People often say that one should live kindly. We learn that we should consider others first. From a young age, we were taught that yielding, sacrificing, and understanding are virtues. But haven't you forgotten one important thing? While living like that, it's myself. We constantly strive to live for our family, for our friends, for our workplace and society. But have I ever truly lived for myself? While sacrificing for others, my own life gradually fades away, and I end up living within the expectations of others. Then suddenly, I come to realize, who am I living for? When will I be able to live for myself? The Buddha said this: how can you share happiness with others without first taking care of yourself? True love begins, not with sacrificing myself, but with respecting myself. Only when I love myself does happiness settle in. And that happiness naturally spreads to those around me. Today, I would like to talk to you about the importance of living for myself. It's time to start practicing self-love so that I don't lose myself living for others any longer. One day, a disciple came to the Buddha, sighed deeply and quietly said, "Master, I have always lived thinking of others first. I gave up on my dream because I was worried my parents would struggle, and I hid my feelings to be considerate of my friends who might feel hurt. At work, I worked harder than anyone else to be a good colleague, and I did my best to ensure my family lacked nothing. Despite that, I am not happy. No, rather I feel like I'm becoming more and more empty." The Buddha quietly looked at his disciple's face. His eyes were filled with deep fatigue and loneliness. "Why don't you take care of yourself?" The disciple looked taken aback. "I don't have time to take care of myself. There are many people who need me, and there are too many things that can't be done without me. I have to take care of my parents, look after the children, and fulfill my responsibilities at work. I have always lived for someone else. But it's strange. If I live like that, I should be happy and fulfilled. But why am I getting more and more exhausted?" The Buddha smiled and poured a cup of tea, offering it to his disciple. "Try this tea," he said. And the disciple quietly took a sip. The warm aroma of the tea brushed against his nose, but his face was still filled with worry. "How does the tea taste?" The disciple thought for a moment and replied, "It's warm and smooth." The Buddha nodded and said, "In that case, this time, in order to give this tea to others, you should continue to follow and the disciple tilted his head. But following the Buddha's intention, he put down the teacup and picked up the empty teapot. "If I want to give this tea to someone, I must first have tea in my own cup. Right?" The disciple hesitated for a moment. "But I must think of others first. Isn't it right to give them more tea, even if I drink a little less?" The Buddha quietly smiled and said, "If the tea I have gradually decreases and eventually becomes empty, what can you give?" The disciple finally fell silent, as if he had just realized something. "You have not taken a single sip for yourself until now, only trying to serve tea to others. But if my cup ends up empty, won't I have nothing left to give? That is the very reason I am becoming exhausted. You have always lived thinking of others first, but you haven't taken care of yourself." Regret and realization gradually arose in the eyes of the disciple. "Master, I always thought that living for others was a good thing. However, deep down in my heart, I always felt something was missing, and it was becoming increasingly difficult. The Buddha spoke in a calm voice. Living for others is a wonderful thing, but what you must do first is to protect yourself. A person who does not value themselves will ultimately not find happiness, even in a life lived for others. If you do not live for yourself, you will end up living under the expectations of others, and in doing so, you will lose your own life. The disciple fell into deep thought. Then what should I do from now on? There are still many people who need me, and I cannot turn my back on them. The Buddha spoke with a warm smile. Learn to love yourself. Only after filling your cup can you truly give to others. Living for yourself is not selfish, rather. It is the true way to help others. The disciple took another sip of tea and smiled gently. I understand now. Master, I will learn how to fill the cup of my heart. The Buddha quietly nodded and said, only then can you and those who need you truly be happy. When you live for others, you end up losing your own life. The disciple quietly asked, reflecting deeply on the Buddha's words, Master, I have believed that living for others is the right way to live. I learned that it is a desirable life to obey my parents, sacrifice for my friends, and quietly fulfill my responsibilities at work. However, strangely enough, I am becoming exhausted. Those people say I am a good person, but I actually feel like I have lost my own life. Why is this happening? The Buddha quietly looked at his disciple and spoke softly. Once upon a time, there lived a kind and diligent woman in a village. She always considered others first and could not refuse anyone's requests. When a neighbor expressed difficulty, I offered my own resources, and when friends asked for help, I sacrificed my time to assist them. I obeyed my parents and endured all sacrifices, putting my own dreams aside for the sake of my husband and children. The student listened attentively to the story and nodded in agreement. That woman must have wanted to be recognized and loved. Helping others must have brought her joy. The Buddha spoke quietly while smiling. At first she thought so too, but as time went on, it became increasingly difficult, and she realized that there was nothing left for herself. She devoted herself to her husband and children, but when she was actually sick, no one took care of her. She sacrificed for her friends, but when she was struggling, no one understood her feelings. She was getting more and more exhausted, and eventually asked herself, who am I living for? The disciple let out a deep sigh. I have a similar experience. I dedicated myself to my teacher, my family, and my friends. But I couldn't take care of my own heart. I learned that considering others first is a virtue, but as time goes by, I feel more and more empty and exhausted. The Buddha quietly nodded his head. Aren't you the main character of my life? But why should I sacrifice my life for someone else's? The disciple seemed shocked by those words and was momentarily at a loss for words. Master, I thought it was natural to live that way. Since I was young, I was taught at home and in society that to be a good person, I must think of others before myself. It was considered a virtue to obey my parents, be considerate to my friends, for my superiors, and sacrifice, and colleagues at work. However, living like that, I found my life at some point disappeared. I have been told that I am a good person, but my wife still feels an unfillable emptiness. The Buddha quietly looked at his disciple and spoke. What would happen if the person who helps push the boat across the river continues to sacrifice himself? The disciple thought for a moment and replied, that person would endlessly help others, but ultimately would not be able to cross the river himself. The Buddha smiled and nodded his head. Indeed, living solely for others, without taking care of yourself, is like endlessly pushing water away while never crossing the river. You must first cross yourself. Only then can you live and help others as well. The disciple fell into deep thought. But Master, I still cannot turn my back on others. I cannot live only for myself. Turning my back on family, friends, and colleagues. The Buddha spoke in a gentle voice. It's not about ignoring others. It means to take care of yourself first, and then look after others. Can I share food with others when I'm hungry? Can I carry someone else while I'm running to the point of exhaustion? If I am not healthy, no one can help me. So stand as the master of your own life. If you do not take care of yourself, ultimately, my life will just belong to others. The disciple quietly nodded. Then how should I take care of my life? I still don't quite understand what it means to live for myself. The Buddha fell silent for a moment and then spoke while looking at the river. The river flows, filling itself and sharing with others as much as it overflows. If the river runs dry, it will ultimately be unable to give water to anyone. My life should be the same. Only when I am filled inside can I share with others. The disciple quietly closed his eyes, reflecting on the Buddha's words. I am beginning to understand a little now. Master, I feel like I have lost my life by living for others for too long. But from now on, I will live for myself. And only then will I be able to help others. The Buddha spoke quietly with a smile. Only then will you live, and the world will become brighter. Why is it important to love oneself? The disciple listened to the Buddha's words and fell into deep thought. He was still struggling between the desire to live for others and the teaching to take care of himself. Master, I am still confused. If I take better care of myself, wouldn't that be selfish? I have always learned that not having sacrificing is the right thing to do, but is taking care of myself first truly a good thing? The Buddha looked at his disciple with a quiet smile. Then he pointed to a small jar next to him and said, "Look at this jar. If I try to share water with others without anything in this jar, what do you think will happen?" The disciple examined the jar. It was already empty inside. If you try to draw water from a jar that resembles nothing, it will eventually be empty, and you won't be able to give anything. The Buddha nodded. Yes. Your mind and body are the same. If you keep sacrificing yourself for others, Without taking care of yourself, you will eventually become exhausted and unable to share anything. If I am not happy, how can I truly make others happy? The disciples suddenly realized how exhausted he had been. So are you saying that loving myself could actually be a way to help others? The Buddha spoke with a warm smile. Only then can true love and sharing be possible. If you do not love yourself, loving others will ultimately come with conditions and burdens. Taking care of and cherishing oneself is the first step towards caring for others. The Buddha held a small lamp in his hand. Look at this lamp if the flame is weak. Can it illuminate the surroundings? The disciple shook his head. If the flame is weak, it will eventually go out. The flame that protects oneself must be strong enough to illuminate the surroundings. The Buddha smiled and nodded. First, light the flame in your heart. Only then can the path I walk and the path others walk be illuminated. If you become exhausted and weak, you will ultimately, even if you want to, be unable to help others. The disciple fell into quiet contemplation. He has believed all along that it is right to neglect his own needs and dedicate everything to others. But in the end, I realized that it exhausted me and had a negative impact on those around me. Master, I learned from a young age that helping others is the most important virtue. I was taught to obey my parents, to be considerate of my friends, and to always be diligent at work. But I actually didn't take care of my heart. As a result, I think I became more and more anxious and exhausted. The Buddha quietly smiled and spoke. To love my parents, I must first be happy. To show consideration to my friends, I must first have a relaxed mind. To work diligently at my job, I must first be healthy. Everything begins with taking care of yourself. The disciple listened to the Buddha's words, deeply engraving them in his heart, and quietly asked, "Then, what should I practice first?" To learn how to love myself. The Buddha spoke in a calm voice, while looking at the river. Just like the flowing river, your life should flow naturally. Do not force yourself to hold on to anything or sacrifice yourself. You should allow yourself to flow comfortably. The Buddha spoke slowly. When you love yourself, your happiness naturally spreads to others. Just as a river overflows only after filling itself, sunlight brightens the world when it shines on its own. So, first cherish yourself and cultivate your life. Then, the love and sharing I give will deepen even more. The disciple bowed his head and quietly repeated, "I understand now. Master, loving myself is indeed a way to love others." The Buddha smiled quietly and spoke for the last time. That is the true enlightenment. The disciple, who practices living for others, listened to the Buddha's words and fell into deep thought. Master, I have believed until now that living for others is the right thing to do. But now my life feels so exhausting and empty. I realize that I need to live for myself too. But I still don't know what to do. What does it mean to live for myself? The Buddha listened to his disciple's concerns and quietly smiled as he spoke. Living for myself is not something grand. It starts with valuing myself and taking care of my heart. People often think that living for others is a virtue. But if you don't take care of yourself, you will eventually become exhausted. The reason I need to live for myself is simple. I need to be healthy and happy so that I can offer complete love and consideration to those around me. The disciple nodded. So where should I start? The Buddha spoke slowly. While looking at the river, if you truly want to live for yourself, you must first look deeply within and understand what you truly desire. You should respect your feelings, know how to say no when necessary, and let go of the idea that sacrificing for others is a virtue. If you practice each step, you will finally learn how to live for yourself. The disciple quietly reflected on the Buddha's words and calmed his mind. First, to honestly look within and see what I truly want. The Buddha looked at the disciple and asked, "Do you know what you truly want?" The disciple hesitated for a moment and quietly shook his head. "I don't know well. I always thought about what others wanted first. I had to live the life my parents wanted, adjusted my personality to what my friends liked, and worked hard to meet my boss's expectations. As a result, I have never deeply thought about what I truly want." The Buddha quietly smiled and threw a small stone onto the river. "Isn't it better to follow the natural flow rather than worrying about where the river should go?" The disciple quietly nodded after hearing the Buddha's words. To understand what you truly want, you must first reflect on your life and recognize what brings you joy and what drains you. The disciple sighed and said, "If I do not take care of myself and try to meet others' expectations, my life will become as restless and confused as a river that has lost its way. In that case, I guess I should start by asking myself questions. I will think about what I like, what makes me struggle, and what the true choices for my life are." The Buddha nodded with a smile. "Secondly, I will practice respecting my feelings and saying no when necessary." The disciple listened to the Buddha's words and fell back into contemplation. "Master, I always wanted to be a good person to others. So when I received requests, I couldn't refuse and prioritized others' feelings. However, in doing so, I ended up neglecting myself and always felt tired and exhausted. How can I respect my feelings?" The Buddha quietly looked around and pointed to a tree. "Look at the tree. It absorbs as much water as it needs and grows while receiving sunlight. But what would happen if that tree gave water to other trees and shaded itself from the sunlight?" The disciple fell into thought. That tree would eventually wither and be unable to grow. The Buddha nodded and spoke. "Indeed, respecting my feelings is the same. You have not taken care of yourself while considering others, even when you are struggling and exhausted. However, if I become too exhausted, ultimately no one will be able to help. So I need to practice saying no when necessary. Refusing is not selfish. It is a way to protect yourself. The disciple thought for a long time and then quietly said, I have prioritized others' feelings over my own. For a long time. But now I need to practice refusing requests that make me uncomfortable. I do not want things. I think that's how I can protect my life. The Buddha nodded with a smile. Thirdly, it's not a virtue to sacrifice for others. Valuing myself is the true wise life, the disciple said quietly. Master, I believed that sacrificing for others was the most desirable way of life. I gave up my dreams for my parents and hid my feelings to avoid being disliked by my friends. At work, I always swallowed my opinions and quietly followed along, fearing that my colleagues would feel uncomfortable. As a result, I am disappearing. However, now that I listen to my master's words, I wonder if living this way is truly right. The Buddha quietly smiled and said, sacrifice should not simply mean lowering and giving up oneself, but rather it should be about nurturing each other healthily. If I cannot take care of myself and live only for others, in the end, you will become increasingly exhausted and collapse. Then, even the people for whom I sacrificed so much will eventually leave you. The disciple nodded thoughtfully. So, have I been living incorrectly until now? Have I been foolish to live my life, believing that sacrifice is a virtue? The Buddha spoke slowly, while looking at the river. When water flows, doesn't the river first fill itself with the surroundings as much as it overflows? The disciple pondered these words deeply. If the river dries up, there will be nothing to share. The Buddha quietly nodded and spoke. Similarly, if I do not value myself, I will ultimately be unable to offer complete love, care to others. If I only regard sacrifice as a virtue, I will gradually lose myself, and in the end, only emptiness and regret will remain. I must first take care of myself and protect myself. Only then can the love you give be healthier and more beautiful. The disciple slowly closed his eyes and asked himself, have I really lived for myself? He has lived for a long time, according to others' expectations, and believed that sacrificing for others was the right way to live. But now he has realized that there is another path besides that. Master, from now on, I will try to live a life that values myself. I want to be a person who loves and cares for myself and then generously gives to others. The Buddha smiled and nodded his head. That is true wisdom. The disciple listened to the Buddha's words and fell into deep thought. Master, I realized many things today. I had only thought that I should live for others and believed that it was a good life. But in the end, I became exhausted and empty. I think I understand a little bit about what it means to live for myself now. The Buddha spoke with a warm smile, saying, yes, you must learn to love yourself in order to truly love others. Value yourself and take care of your own life first. Only then will the happiness within me overflow, and it will naturally be conveyed to those around me. The disciple quietly bowed his head and repeated these words. Loving yourself is true enlightenment. Are you really living for yourself right now? Are you perhaps sacrificing yourself to meet others' expectations and not taking care of yourself? Starting today, try to take small actions for yourself. Think seriously about what I want. Practice saying no when necessary and start respecting my feelings. Living for myself is the way to create better relationships and offer healthier love. Thank you for being with me today as well. I hope your day is peaceful and happy. I'll see you again in the next video.